currently our only what we call base load power source, that steady source of power that can operate, like I said, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that also has the ability to just ramp up really quickly when the wind suddenly shuts down or the sun goes down for the night. We have that natural gas ability to provide that backup.
Okay. So I think people have probably heard SaskPower talking about, what are the technologies that are available now? What are the ones that are in the future? And actually, and just having been in some other meetings like this, it's been really interesting to see, people are engaged. There's a lot of technology solutions that customers have proposed. They want to know that you're looking at them. Can you tell us, and again, understood that today's, overall sort of session is a lot about nuclear, but can you talk about the availability of other technologies, aside from nuclear that SaskPower is looking at?
For sure. So you can see we've split our chart here into what's available right now, really before 2030, and then some technologies that we're hoping to take advantage of in the future. I've already spoken to wind and solar. We have great resources there, and natural gas. Battery energy storage, I mentioned, we're starting to get into. We can also import power, and that can provide some of that base load available 24 hours a day power for us, but there is a limit there. There are other sources such as distributed energy resources. This is things like putting net metering, small scale solar and wind out there on people's homes or farms, for example. And that is a small source right now that might increase in the future. Demand side management is things like energy efficiency measures just to bring our demand down in general, or demand response, which is where we make an agreement with, say, a large industrial customer to shift some of their peak demand from that time when everybody's using power. And if they shift that to a low demand time, then we can actually reduce some of the generation that we need to build, which helps to reduce our emissions.
Okay.
For future technologies, we're looking at natural gas, adding carbon capture there, perhaps some more hydro. And in the future, we could even transition some of our natural gas facilities to an alternate fuel, such as hydrogen.
Okay, thanks. I guess we've talked about some of the key technical kind of considerations that you and the team are working through. I guess any other thoughts, just maybe more generally about, how you plan to go about this transition in terms of approach or other things that we should be thinking about?
Sure. So I'll just speak a little bit about, how we do start our planning. We really look at a forecast of how much power we think Saskatchewan residents and businesses will use every year going forward. We look at our unit retirements, what's needed to keep our system reliable so the lights are always on. Cost, reliability, and sustainability are really our three big considerations. So that includes greenhouse gas emissions and regulations. Other factors include, what works in Saskatchewan's cold winters or really hot summers, what fuel sources are available, how close to a load center can we get, is water available at the locations we're looking at, what are the road conditions, services, transmission in the area. And then we also look at things like impact on social factors, so jobs, local economy, what's the impact there, what's the opportunity for Indigenous participation, for example.
Okay. Okay, well, as we said, there's a few questions in here. I'll just start with some of those, and just in terms of some of that. So, again, we'll go to the Slido stuff in a minute, but beside that Slido, there's look for the Q&A section, and then that's where you can go and pose your questions in there. And I'll be watching for those, and I'll just call some of these out to Nanette, just so we don't ask her 100 questions at the same time. So I guess one of the questions here is, just about Manitoba Hydro and some of the imports. What can we reasonably expect from, other utilities like Manitoba Hydro in terms of, how much can we import from them versus, having to do all of this ourselves?
That's a great question. And it's something that we're sort of continuously working on. We have 3 opportunities to import. Of course, that's from Manitoba, Alberta, or to the south to North Dakota, and availability in the United States. So those discussions are ongoing. We've recently committed to a new tie line to the United States. We were able to make that agreement with them to increase our potential to import and export energy up to 650 megawatts by 2027. As far as Manitoba goes, we've been having those conversations. We've done a lot of study on that. At the moment, there just isn't a lot that Manitoba has to offer us. So in the future, there's potential there. but currently it's not something that's in the near term.
Okay. So I want to ask a question here just about nuclear, because I do hear people, they're curious about the costs involved with nuclear. So is there any comments that you can make just to compare, some of the capital expenditures of nuclear versus operating expenses with nuclear, compared to, say, carbon capture or other technologies or natural gas? How expensive do we think nuclear is going to be, in the grand scheme compared to some of these other options?
That's a great question. We're looking to, that's kind of the information we're also gathering right now. A lot of these new technologies, cost is something that has to be determined. Uh, the new technologies, including small modular reactors, carbon capture on natural gas, for example, they are going to cost more than the options that we're utilizing today. Of course, you have that added need to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions, and there's just added processes and things that go along with that. I can't speak specifically right now to the difference, capital costs and operating costs, but operating costs, I guess I could speak to for nuclear in particular. Once you have that capital investment, which will be a bit of a larger capital investment upfront, then your operating costs are fairly steady long term because you have minimal need to replenish that fuel supply the same way you might with natural gas or coal.
Okay. One question here just about natural gas. Of course, you mentioned that I think it's been described as kind of a bridge fuel, but, it of course still does contribute to, emissions. So, I mean, how is it compared to coal, in terms of that? And then, how do we sort of, best make our investments in technologies that, don't contribute to greenhouse gases, so we're not kind of, 2 steps forward, 1 step back on those? And I guess the follow-up to that is, why is solar not a bigger part of that?
Okay. So natural gas does have the benefit of having about half or less than half even of the emissions of conventional coal. So shifting for that short term to natural gas is helping to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions significantly at the moment, just to keep our system so that every time you turn on your light switch, it's there available for you. In the future, as these energy storage technologies develop, as we can modernize our grid and those technologies develop, and other new technologies like we were talking about, small modular reactors or something else, something to replace that baseload power comes on, then we'll be able to further shift out of even the natural gas to have even lower emissions.
Okay. There's just a question here, just and kind of a note on the video, just about nuclear kind of being shown with some other sort of baseload pieces there, and maybe a concern that it was sort of giving the wrong impression in terms of in terms of emissions. In your view, is nuclear considered to be essentially non-emitting for carbon purposes when you're evaluating it?
Yes, for greenhouse gas emissions, about, but those emissions are very minimal compared to the long-term production emissions.
Okay. There's a question here that the 2035 timeframe is considered to be unrealistic. Just is SaskPower planning to share some of the forecasts on basically the decarbonization side and just some of the background on how that conclusion was drawn?
We're going through a process right now to engage with the public and come forward with a long-term plan that has had, very public visibility. And I hope that in that final report, we can maybe speak to some of that more. I don't want to get too much into detail here because we only have 5 more minutes, but we can definitely answer more questions on, what the challenge is with that feasibility. And as I mentioned, 12 years, that's one of the biggest challenges. We have a huge amount of generation that you would have to shift in 12 years, and there just isn't the technology available to just instantly make that shift. If we're planning a new plant right now, if we make a decision today, for example, for a large gas plant, it's 7 years before it's in service. So you can imagine
Right.
12 years is just difficult.
That goes by quickly. Okay. I want to move to some of the other questions. And again, I know we've got a good chunk of them, but not all of them. Just by the way, and we'll do a plug for it at the end. We do have an engagement site. Really, any questions that we didn't get to today, or you don't have a chance to ask a little bit later, on the engagement site, and that's at engage.saskpower.com to get to today. I just want to go to the next one. This is the Slido sort of part of it, and we want to ask you a couple of ranking questions in here, and I'll just start this up now. So if you go to the Slido portion of your screen there, and you can take a look at that question there. So the question we want to ask first here is, and this is a prioritization question. We're just curious to know of these three things, how would you rank them in order? So thinking about the characteristics of your sort of quote unquote ideal power generation technology in terms of the environment, how would you rank these? And I'll just read them out. They may be in a different order in yours, but just go ahead and select. So the first one on the screen here, basically there's a regulatory framework in place to manage how the technology is retired at the end of its lifespan. Other option, low to no greenhouse gas emissions, or little to no impact to wildlife and water resources. And it looks like so far on this one, the little to no impact on, pardon me, regulations are in place for the for managing the technology, little to no greenhouse gas emissions, and minimizing impacts on wildlife and water resources. But top on some of that regulatory side. I'll just pop the next one up here. This is on the economy. So of these three here, which ones are in order of importance? I'll just read them off. Economic benefits for the local community, long-term price stability, and third one, attracting investment from outside the province. Let's give another moment for that. So far, looks like long-term price stability, economic benefits for the local community, and then attracting investment from outside the province in that order. And the last one here. Thanks for doing this so quickly. Half an hour goes by fast, like I said. And let's talk about land use. Of these three here, which is most important? Minimizing impact to the appearance of a landscape, the ability to coexist with other land uses, and the third one, not reducing agricultural land use as a part of that. So far it looks like coexisting with other land uses is most important, not reducing access to agricultural land use, and then appearance is sort of coming out number 3 in that mix. Okay. We'll wrap that part there. We've got 1 minute left. We'll just kind of thank you and sort of get you on your way to the next session here. But anyway, this is a conversation that's really very much underway and still kind of continuing. So as I mentioned, if you go to the website, saskpower.com/engage. There's some live recordings up there of other folks that the net works with touching on some of these topics. And on the engagement site there, and here's a quick screen capture of it. You can go up there, ask a question. If you've got some ideas or suggestions, you can put them up there. Others can upvote them, and kind of a social feature there to that as well. And we've also just recently launched a new version of a survey. And again, these build on each other. So if you want to take a few minutes and go and complete that, we would very much appreciate it. Sign up for the newsletter so you can stay involved in some of these pieces. So anyways, that gets us to 12:30. It's time to move on to the next session. And again, really encourage you to come back and connect with us online. And on behalf of myself and everyone at SaskPower, we really appreciate the time that you spent with us today, and hope to see you again. Thanks, everyone.